I am a 26-year-old woman, working as a nurse in a hospital in Mobile, Alabama. Previously, I have always worked during the day and I switched to the night shift due to personal reasons. As my initiation into the world of night shifts, and this desolate, rumored to be haunted hospital seemed to set the stage for my first eerie encounter. I slumped into the worn-out chair at the nurse's station, surrounded by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of disinfectant. As the clock ticked towards midnight, the atmosphere changed. The lights flickered like hesitant ghosts, unsure whether to fully manifest. A cold draft made its way through the corridor, making me shiver despite the warmth of my uniform. Determined to maintain my composure, I busied myself with paperwork, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that lingered in the air. Just as I convinced myself it was all in my head, the clock struck midnight, and a sudden hush draped the hospital in an oppressive silence. I decided to make my rounds, hoping the routine would dispel the unease clawing at the edges of my mind. The corridors seemed longer at night, the shadows more menacing. As I checked empty rooms, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. It was when I reached the abandoned wing that the night took a chilling turn. The air thickened with an otherworldly energy, and a distant sound, like faint whispers, reached my ears. "Hello?" I called, more to reassure myself than to elicit a response. The only reply was a gentle echo of my own voice, magnified in the emptiness. I pressed on, the whispers growing in intensity. They were no longer formless. They seemed to carry distinct voices, almost pleading. "Help us," a voice murmured, barely audible. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The corridor darkened as I approached the end, and the air turned colder, nearly freezing. The whispers were no longer gentle. They transformed into guttural moans, a symphony of sorrow that reverberated through the desolation. Fear clung to me like a second skin, but an invisible force propelled me forward. At the corridor's end, the dim light revealed shadowy figures moving along the walls. My breath caught as the shadows twisted and contorted, taking on distorted forms. As if the shadows were dancing, a play of darkness that sent shivers down my spine. Panic seized me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. As the figures dissolved back into the shadows, the air lightened, and the whispers faded. I stumbled backward, drenched in sweat, my mind grappling with the surreal encounter. Retreating to the nurse's station, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, an overactive imagination fueled by exhaustion. Yet, the whispers persisted, haunting me throughout the night. They followed me like a specter, lurking in the corners of the hospital, always just out of sight. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights, sent a shiver down my spine. That night, I became a reluctant believer in the tales of the hospital's haunted history. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I questioned my sanity, contemplating whether I should share my experience with others. But who would believe the ramblings of a weary night shift nurse? The shadows had retreated into the recesses of the hospital, leaving me to grapple with the aftermath of that encounter. I found solace in the company of fellow night shift workers, their tired eyes reflecting the shared burden of the graveyard shift. One night, as I shared my ordeal with a seasoned nurse, she glanced at me with a knowing look. "You're not the first one to experience something strange here," she confided, her voice low. "These halls hold more than just the echoes of medicine and footsteps. Some say the past lingers here, especially at night." Her words resonated with my own experiences. The hospital, with its peeling paint and dimly lit corridors, harbored more than the living patients and the routine procedures. It held echoes of another era, trapped between the walls like ethereal remnants of past patients. As weeks turned into months, I became accustomed to the nocturnal routine, but the memory of that haunting night never faded. The hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a sanctuary for lingering souls, their whispers a melancholic soundtrack to the solitude of the night shift. I continued to tread the hospital's halls with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The whispers had become a constant companion, a reminder that the line between the living and the spectral was thinner than I dared to acknowledge. One night, as I sat at the nurse's station, the clock ticking away the hours, a familiar chill swept through the air. The lights flickered, and the whispers returned, softer this time, as if beckoning me to follow. Against my better judgment, I stood up, drawn once again to the abandoned wing. The whispers guided me, their spectral melody guiding my steps. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in the stillness. As I reached around the same spot where the shadowy figures had danced before, the air grew colder, and the whispers coalesced into a single voice. "Release us," it pleaded, a plea that echoed with centuries of unfulfilled longing. A flicker of understanding sparked within me. These were not malevolent spirits, but souls trapped in the afterlife. The realization filled me with a strange empathy, and I whispered back, "How can I help you?" The air shimmered, and the shadows gathered, forming ethereal figures bathed in a soft, haunting light. The room pulsated with a gentle energy, and the whispers transformed into words of gratitude. The corridor, once a realm of spectral dread, now emanated a quiet peace. The shadows dissipated, leaving behind a sense of closure that lingered in the air. As the clock struck dawn, the first rays of sunlight bathed the hospital in a warm glow, dispelling the remnants of the night's spectral encounter. From that night forward, the whispers ceased, and the hospital felt different, as if the weight of the past had lifted. The other night shift workers noticed the change, their tired eyes reflecting a newfound tranquility. I never spoke of the encounter. The haunted whispers became a distant memory, and the hospital returned to its routine, and I continued my nocturnal duties, forever changed by the unexplainable events that unfolded in the corridors of the hospital I work in. I am a 46-year-old male that works at a museum in a busy town in New York. I have worked at this museum for 8 months now and am normally the only one in the museum during my shifts. The museum was silent, shrouded in darkness, as I settled into my routine night shift as the security guard. The only company I had was the soft hum of the surveillance equipment. I glanced at the bank of monitors, each displaying a different section of the museum. It was usually a peaceful job, until that one fateful night. As I monitored the cameras, a chill crept down my spine. On one screen, shadows seemed to dance across the artifacts, twisting and turning in unnatural ways. I leaned in, squinting at the footage. It had to be a glitch, I thought. But then, an antique vase wobbled on its pedestal, as if someone had brushed against it. My heart began to race. Curiosity overcoming my initial unease, I decided to investigate. The museum echoed with each step, and my footsteps seemed to magnify in the empty corridors. I reached the exhibit in question, and everything appeared normal. The vase stood undisturbed, and the shadows had ceased. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a faint soft whisper. It sounded like a distant murmur, too faint to discern. I scanned the room, but it was empty. Shrugging off the unease, I returned to the security room, dismissing the strange occurrences as mere tricks of the imagination. Back in the surveillance room, I rewound the footage, determined to find a logical explanation. As the images played in reverse, I noticed something that sent shivers down my spine. The shadows, once formless, began to take shape. Figures twisted and contorted, their movements unnatural. Faces emerged from the darkness, their features distorted with agony. "What the?" I muttered to myself, my eyes widening. The temperature in the room dropped, and an icy breeze brushed against my skin. The surveillance monitors flickered, and the room plunged into absolute darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for the flashlight on my belt. When the beam of light finally pierced the blackness, I found myself alone, surrounded by the silent exhibits. I rushed to check the footage again, my hands trembling. But this time, the screen showed nothing out of the ordinary. No shadowy figures, no haunted faces. It was as if the museum had returned to its dormant state. I shook my head, attributing the bizarre images to fatigue and my imagination. Just as I began to regain my composure, a soft voice whispered my name, a barely audible sigh that made me freeze. "David." I spun around, my flashlight casting long, ominous shadows on the museum walls. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. Silence greeted me. Uneasy, I continued my patrol, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. As I passed the ancient Egyptian exhibit, a peculiar sound caught my attention, a rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on stone. I approached cautiously, the tapping growing louder with each step. The room was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to come alive, dancing in the faint light. "Hello?" I called out again, this time more hesitantly. The tapping ceased, and a hushed whisper enveloped the room. "Help me, David." My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the room, searching for the source of the eerie plea. The oppressive air seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. "Who's there? What do you want?" I stammered, my voice losing confidence. The room fell silent, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I whirled around, but there was no one there. The whisper returned, now a chorus of ghostly voices echoing through the exhibit. "Find us, David." A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape the haunting voices. As I retraced my steps, the museum transformed before my eyes. The once familiar exhibits now exuded an otherworldly energy. The air vibrated with an unseen force. "Release us from this eternal prison," the voices pleaded, growing more urgent. I raced back to the security room, my heart pounding in my chest. The monitors flickered back to life, displaying the exhibits in their normal, lifeless state. The haunted faces and dancing shadows had vanished, leaving no trace of the supernatural events that had unfolded. Unable to shake the unsettling feeling that lingered, I decided to call it a night. As I made my way to the exit, the museum seemed to exhale a collective sigh, as if the spirits were simply not there. The doors creaked shut behind me, and I hesitated, glancing back at the imposing structure. "David," the wind whispered through the empty night, carrying with it a sense of both gratitude and sorrow. I never returned to the museum after that night. The haunting memories of those events continued to torment my dreams. The security footage remained a mystery, a silent witness to the inexplicable phenomena that unfolded in the quiet corridors of the museum. I am a 22-year-old male that works as a night shift security guard. I've worked in this high-end office in Maryland for 2 years now. This one night shift at the office changed my view ever since. The office building stood tall against the night sky, its windows shimmering like ghostly eyes. My night shift began routinely, monitoring security cameras and ensuring the deserted halls remained undisturbed. As the clock struck midnight, I headed to the elevator on the 13th floor to grab a quick snack from the vending machines. The office building, with its sleek architecture and polished floors, usually exuded a sense of professionalism. However, as I entered the empty elevator, a subtle unease settled over me. I pressed the button for the ground floor, expecting a smooth descent. The doors closed, and the descent began. Yet, the building's silence felt heavier than usual. The elevator went past the ground floor, descending into an abyss of darkness. Panic gripped me as I pressed the emergency button, desperately trying to stop the descent. The elevator halted with a jolt, and the doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor which I have never seen this part of the building before. The air in the basement was colder, and a flickering light above barely illuminated the halls. The distant sound of dripping water echoed through the silence. My flashlight revealed storage rooms filled with forgotten office supplies and dusty furniture. The walls seemed to close in, creating an oppressive atmosphere. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to explore further or return to the safety of the elevator. As if guided by an unseen force, I ventured deeper into the basement, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Time lost its meaning as I navigated the maze-like structure. The flickering lights played tricks on my mind, casting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Unsettled, I quickened my pace, hoping to find an exit. Suddenly, the elevator doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the heart of the basement. Panic surged as I pounded on the doors, shouting for help, but the sound of my voice was swallowed by the eerie silence. The building seemed to have come alive with whispers, unintelligible voices that echoed from the darkness. Fighting the rising fear, I continued my quest for an escape route. The corridors twisted and turned, leading me in circles. It was as if the basement itself was playing tricks on me, designed to keep me lost. As I stumbled through the cold, dark hallways, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just random sounds. They formed words, calling my name with a cadence. "John! John, come closer!" the voices urged, sending shivers down my spine. I rounded a corner, and the corridor stretched endlessly before me. At the far end, a faint glow emanated from a half-open door. Against my better judgment, I approached, the whispers now replaced by an indistinct humming. The room beyond the door revealed a dimly lit chamber filled with dusty files and old office equipment. In the center of the room stood a figure, its back turned to me. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to see its face, but it remained obscured in shadows. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face distorted by sorrow. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and a cold wind swept through the room. "Help me!" it pleaded, its voice echoing with a haunting resonance. Before I could react, the figure dissolved into darkness, leaving only the chilling echo of its plea. Determined to escape, I retraced my steps, the whispers now replaced by desperate cries. Each turn I took leading me deeper into the heart of the basement. I felt a growing sense of dread, a primal fear that urged me to flee. As I approached the elevator, the whispers reached a fevered pitch. The air crackled with an unseen energy. I pressed the elevator button, praying for the doors to open. Hesitant but with no other option, I stepped inside. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent, leaving the basement behind. Relief washed over me as the familiar sight of the 13th floor appeared. However, the unease lingered. The elevator didn't stop on the ground floor. Instead, it continued its ascent, bypassing the floors altogether. Something's not right, I muttered to myself, my anxiety growing with each passing moment. The elevator climbed higher and higher, the floors blurring together as if in a surreal nightmare. The once familiar hum of the elevator machinery now sounded like an ominous symphony. The doors finally opened, revealing a floor shrouded in darkness. I stepped out cautiously, finding myself on a floor that seemed to exist between the realms of reality and the unknown. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and the silence was deafening. I wandered through the dimly lit corridor, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The walls had faded wallpaper, and old-fashioned gas lamps cast long shadows along the floor. As I explored this mysterious floor, I noticed figures moving in the periphery of my vision. Ghostly silhouettes danced along the walls, their movements synchronized with an eerie rhythm. The air crackled with a spectral energy, and a soft, haunting melody filled the void. "Welcome," a voice whispered, its source elusive. I turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor. The figure beckoned, and against my better judgment, I followed. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We are the echoes of the forgotten. We used to work here," the figure replied, its voice echoing through the ethereal space. The figures around us continued their spectral dance, their movements a melancholic expression of long-lost memories. I felt a profound sadness emanating from them, a collective yearning for release. Suddenly, the corridor ended, and we stood before a towering arched door. The figure pointed, and I hesitantly pushed it open. Beyond lay a vast expanse of stars. With a deep breath, I turned away and retraced my steps. The corridor folded back into reality, and the elevator doors awaited me. As they slid open, I found myself back on the 13th floor, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the surreal journey I had undertaken. The elevator descended to the ground floor, and I stepped out into the empty lobby. The night was still, and the once haunting whispers had vanished. The office building stood silent, its windows no longer shimmering with ghostly eyes. I exited the building, the cool night air washing over me. Glancing back at the towering structure, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed a reality beyond our understanding. The mysteries of the basement and the ethereal floor lingered in my thoughts. As I walked away, the office building seemed to recede into the distance, its silhouette blending with the cityscape. The night held its secrets, and I carried with me the memory of a journey that transcended the boundaries of the mundane.